My son brought a black girl up off the cleaning crew, and now she keeps a diary like she's owed a seat at this table. That's what my mother-in-law said, and the whole family laughed. She said it on a Sunday at the long table in the White House on Grandview Avenue, with the candles lit and the good gravy boat out. And she said it while holding a small cloth-bound book that did not belong to her. The book belonged to Tabitha Rhoades. Tabitha was sitting 4 chairs down, hands flat on the linen, watching her own private words get carried around that room like a party trick. Lorraine Vance read 3 pages aloud, the prayers, the grief, a line about feeling like a guest in a house she scrubbed clean every holiday. She put a little voice on it, a soft mocking quaver, and the table howled. Garrett laughed too. Garrett was Tabitha's husband, and Garrett was the one who had slid that diary down the table to his mother in the first place. Nobody moved to stop it. Nobody spoke up for her. The cousins laughed into their wine, and the uncle by the window dabbed his eyes like it was the funniest thing he had heard all year. By the time the lawyer finished playing What Mama Left Behind, no one at that table was laughing, and the house on Grandview no longer belonged to a single Vance in the room. Let me take you back. 6 months earlier, none of them would have guessed it. Not Lorraine, not Garrett. Not one of them ever thought the quiet woman taking dictation at the foot of the table held anything worth holding. Tabitha Rhoades was 41 years old, and for 19 of those years, she had been the official court reporter for the Dubuque County Courthouse, down on Central Avenue where the old limestone building looked out toward the river. Her job was simple to describe and almost impossible to do well. She sat below the bench, fingers resting on a steno machine no wider than a bread loaf, and she caught every word, the objections, the confessions, the lies told under oath, the long pauses a guilty man takes before he answers. She caught all of it, exactly, and she never once put her own feeling into the record. Lorraine called it glorified typing. Lorraine said that more than once, at more than one dinner, with a smile that made it sound like a kindness. It was not typing, it was witness. 23 syllables a second, no slower, and every one of them true. Judges in 3 counties asked for Tabitha by name when a trial mattered. She had taken down the worst day of 100 families' lives and never let her hands shake. People like Tabitha did not need to raise their voice. The record did the speaking, and the record never blinked. She lived across town from Grandview in the North End, in a narrow clapboard house off Romberg Avenue that she had bought with her own money the year she turned 30. 2 doors down stood the AME Church on Garfield, and on Sunday mornings before the Vance dinners, she could hear the choir warming up through her kitchen window while she pressed her good blouse. Coffee and steam and hymn, all at once. That was her hour, the one nobody at Grandview knew she had. Her mother had cleaned hotel rooms downtown for 31 years, at the big riverfront place where the carpet was thick and the tips were thin. Tabitha grew up learning a lesson her mother never meant to teach. Every nice room you walk into, her mother would say, smoothing a bedspread that wasn't hers, is a room somebody let you into. Be grateful. Be quiet. Don't touch what isn't yours. Tabitha carried that line in her chest like a stone for 40 years. She married into a family that proved it true at every holiday. And still, all she ever wanted was a small and ordinary thing. She wanted one family, just one, to look at her across a table and say without flinching that she was theirs. She had married Garrett Vance at 28. He had been gentle then, or had seemed gentle, and gentle is easy to confuse with weak when you are young and hungry to belong. The Vances of Dubuque still carried themselves like the name meant something on the bluffs. There was the house on Grandview, tall and white with the wide porch, and there was Lorraine's place out on Asbury Road, and there was the matriarch at the top of all of it, Cordelia Vance, Mama to everyone, whether they had earned the word or not. Mama was the only one of them who ever truly looked at Tabitha. It started small, a nod across a crowded room, Then Mama asking Tabitha to sit beside her, away from the noise, because, she said, "You are the only one in this family who listens with both ears." Mama was sharp into her 80s, sharp enough to know exactly who in her family was waiting for her to die and counting the rooms while they waited. She watched them count. She said nothing. Tabitha understood that kind of silence. She lived in it herself. In Mama's last year, when the doctors stopped using hopeful words, the family thinned out fast. The cousins got busy. Garrett found reasons. Lorraine sent flowers and a card and stayed home on Asbury Road, where she said she could not bear to see her mother so reduced. What Lorraine could not bear, Tabitha learned later, was the smell of a sick room and the lack of anything in it worth pocketing. So it was Tabitha who drove up Grandview Avenue 6 nights a week. Tabitha who learned which pills came with food and which came with sleep. Tabitha who sat in the wing chair by the bed, reading the river news aloud until Mama's breathing went slow and even. The house was full of clocks, and in those long evenings she heard every one of them. Mama had a way of talking in those months, half memory, half instruction. She would take Tabitha's hand in her papery one and say things that did not seem to add up to anything. "The truth keeps better on tape than on paper," she said one night, out of nowhere, watching the ceiling. Tabitha thought it was the medicine talking. She wrote it in her journal that night anyway, the way she wrote everything, because a woman who keeps the record keeps all of it. There was a cedar hope chest at the foot of Mama's bed, a heavy old thing with a brass lock, and in a year of evenings, Tabitha never once saw it open. She asked about it twice. Both times, Mama only smiled and said, "In time, child, in time," and changed the subject to the weather over the bluffs. And there was the key. 3 weeks before the end, on an evening when the house was quiet and the river had gone silver under the moon, Mama reached under her pillow and drew out a small brass key on a faded blue grosgrain ribbon. The ribbon was worn soft, the color of a sky that can't decide on rain. She pressed it into Tabitha's palm and folded the younger woman's fingers over it with both hands. "Keep it warm," Mama said. That was all. "Keep it warm." Tabitha asked what it opened. Mama only patted her hand and closed her eyes. So Tabitha tied the ribbon around her own neck, under her collar, where it lay against her skin, and she let the question go. She had spent her whole life not touching what wasn't hers. She did not pry into a dying woman's secrets. About a week after that, Mama asked her for something stranger. "You take down words for a living," Mama said. She was propped up that day, clearer than she had been in a while. "I want you to take down mine. Get your machine. Record me right. Word for word, the way you do it at that courthouse. I want it true." Tabitha brought a small recorder up the next evening, the kind she used for personal notes, and she sat by the bed and let it run while Mama talked. And Mama talked for the better part of an hour, slow and deliberate, naming things and naming people. Tabitha thought it was reminiscence, an old woman setting her memories in order before the dark. She transcribed it later at her own kitchen table, off Romberg, neat and exact, and filed it with her journals. And she did not understand one word of what she had actually been handed. She would understand it all, but not for months, and not until after the laughing. Mama passed on a Tuesday in the gray hour before the choir would have started 2 doors from Tabitha's own house. Tabitha was there. She was the only one of them who was. She held the old woman's hand until the last clock in the house seemed to be the only thing still breathing, and then she drove home in the dark and did not cry, because crying was not a thing she did where the Vances might see it and call it a performance. The funeral filled up fast. Funerals always do. Suddenly, every cousin had loved Mama desperately. Lorraine wore black that cost more than Tabitha's car payment and wept in the front pew where the photographers from the church bulletin could see her. Garrett held his mother's elbow. Nobody held Tabitha's. She stood at the back near the door, in the seat closest to the exit. the way her own mother had taught her to stand in any room she'd been led into. The reading of the will was set for the following week at the offices of an estate attorney downtown, a woman named Marguerite Okafor, whom none of the Vances had met. Lorraine made a great show of dreading it. The estate, she told the cousins, was a burden, a responsibility, a thing she would shoulder for the good of the family name, since after all, blood inherits, and someone has to keep the house on Grandview in proper hands. Tabitha heard about that secondhand, the way she heard about most things, and something in her, after the long year and the cold pew and the front row tears, simply went quiet and final. She decided she was done. She would go to the reading because it would look strange not to. She would sit in the back. And whatever small thing Mama might have left her, a brooch, a teacup, a line of thanks, she would let it pass. She had already made up her mind to sign whatever Garrett's lawyers slid across a table, to take nothing, to ask for nothing, and to drive home to the North End and close the door on the Vances of Dubuque for good. She had spent 41 years being grateful for rooms she'd been let into. She was tired all the way to the bone. The blue ribbon still hung at her throat, under her collar, warm from her skin the way Mama asked, and she had half decided to mail the little key back to the estate with a polite note and let the cedar chest stay locked forever. Somebody else's mystery now. That was the plan. To disappear cleanly the way quiet women are trained to disappear. The night before the reading, she sat at her kitchen table off Romberg with her old journals stacked in front of her and the choir silent next door, and she opened the notebook from Mama's last year, meaning only to say goodbye to the woman on the page. She turned to the transcript she had taken that strange evening, the hour she'd let the recorder run, and she read the first lines she had typed without ever really hearing them, and her hands went flat on the table, the way they did at the courthouse when a witness said a thing that changed the whole shape of a trial. The transcript began the way Mama always began, with the weather. "The bluffs are clear tonight," Tabitha had typed, "and the river is running high." Then it went somewhere else. To Tabitha, who has sat with me, the words read, "To Tabitha, who carried me when my own blood counted the rooms." And then, plain as a docket entry, a list. The house on Grandview, the accounts at the bank on Main, the cedar chest and everything folded inside it. To Tabitha, to Tabitha, to Tabitha, again and again, the name landing like a gavel. Tabitha sat very still in her kitchen off Grandview Avenue with her hands flat on the table. Outside the window, the church on Garfield was dark, the choir long gone home, and the only sound was the refrigerator humming and her own blood loud in her ears. She had transcribed a will. A year ago, by a dying woman's bed, she had set down a last testament word for word and filed it among her grocery lists and her grief, and she had never once understood what her own fingers were doing. The truth keeps better on tape than on paper. Mama had said that to the ceiling like a fever dream, and Tabitha had written it down because she wrote everything down, and now the sentence stood up off the page and looked her in the eye. She did not call anyone. It was past midnight, and there was no one in the Vance family she trusted with a thing this size. She closed the notebook. She pressed her palm flat on the cover the way you press a hand on a Bible. And she sat there until the gray came up over the bluffs, thinking, not crying, because crying was not a thing she did. In the morning, she went to work. That was the thing people never understood about Tabitha Rhoades. The world could tilt clean off its hinges, and she would still be in her chair below the bench at 9 sharp, fingers resting on the steno keys, catching every word. There is a steadiness that grief cannot reach, and she had built hers over 19 years of holding other people's worst days in her hands without dropping a syllable. That morning, the courtroom emptied for the noon recess, and she stayed in her seat after the judge had gone, just breathing in the quiet limestone cool of the place that had always been hers. That was where Othel Briggs found her. Othel was past 70 now, the organist at the AME church on Garfield, and long before that, He had been a clerk in this very courthouse. He was the one who had first set a steno machine in front of a 20-year-old Tabitha and told her that her hands were quick enough to catch lightning if she trained them right. He still came around the courthouse some afternoons to see old faces, to sit in the gallery and listen to the rhythm of justice the way other men listened to a ball game. He sat down beside her in the empty gallery, slow, both hands on his cane. "You've got to look," he said. "I've seen that look on you exactly twice. Once the day you passed your certification, once the day you buried your mother." So she told him. Quiet and even, the way she said everything. She told him about the transcript and the list of names that was hers, all hers, and about Mama's voice on a small recorder, talking like she was just remembering, and about the family already circling the house on Grandview like it was theirs by blood and birthright. Othel listened the way an old clerk listens, without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet a long moment, looking down at the empty bench where so many true and false things had been said over the years. "What are you going to do?" he said. It was not really a question. "Nothing," Tabitha said. "I'm going to sign whatever they put in front of me, and I'm going to go home, and I'm going to stop letting myself into that house." Othel nodded slowly, like he was considering it, like it was a reasonable thing a reasonable woman might decide. Then he said the thing that turned her around. 20 years, he said, you've spent making the record true. Sitting in that chair, making sure not one word of what really happened gets lost or twisted or burned. You never once let a powerful man's lie stand in your record because he was powerful. He set his hand over hers, the old knuckles warm. Now a woman who loved you, left you the truest record she had, and you're going to let them burn it because you're tired. He squeezed once. Go make this one true, Tabitha, same as all the others. That's all it is. She did not answer him, but something in her chest moved, a stone shifting that had sat in one place for 40 years, and they both heard it. There was a ledger. Among the papers Mama had pressed on her in those last weeks, there was a slim accounts book in the old woman's hand, the kind a careful person of that generation kept, every dollar in and out. Tabitha had glanced at it once and set it aside. That night she opened it under her kitchen lamp, and near the back in a column of small notations, one line caught her eye and held it. DMs, it read. Paid in full, summer. She did not know what it meant, but she had spent her life learning that the small lines in the record are where the truth hides, the offhand entries nobody thinks anyone will read. So she did a thing she would not have done a week before. She went looking. DM took her 2 days and an old address book to run down. Della Meraz, a name Tabitha half remembered, a young woman who had come a few afternoons a week that last year to help with Mama's care, then stopped coming, and nobody in the family had ever said why. She found Della in a small apartment over on the West End, near the community college, a tired young woman with textbooks stacked on every flat surface and a baby asleep in the next room. Della knew Tabitha at the door. You're the one who stayed, she said, and stepped back to let her in. They sat at a little kitchen table not unlike Tabitha's own, and Tabitha laid the ledger open to the line. Della looked at it, and her eyes went bright and wet. She didn't want anybody to know, Della said softly. I was about to drop out. Nursing school. I had the baby coming, and the debt was more than I could see the top of. I only mentioned it once, sitting with her, just talking the way you do. I never asked her for anything. Della pressed her lips together. 2 weeks later, the school called and said my balance was settled. Paid in full. Anonymous, they said, but I knew. There wasn't anybody else. She wiped her face with the flat of her hand. She told me something, that last time I saw her. She said, when the time comes and things get decided, you trust the one who keeps the record. I didn't know what she meant. I thought it was the medicine. Tabitha sat very still. The one who keeps the record. Mama had been laying a trail of those words like seed corn, dropping them in front of one person and another, and only now were they all coming up at once. She meant me, Tabitha said quietly. "I keep the record." "Then I guess," Della said with a small, wet laugh, "she figured I'd be all right. She said you'd see it through." Tabitha drove home along the river with the ledger on the seat beside her, and she understood that she had been handed more than a house. She had been handed a list of promises a dead woman could no longer keep on her own. There was a second name. In Mama's address book, tucked between 2 pages, a slip of paper with a young man's name and a phone number, and 3 words underlined twice. Toby Childs. She remembered Childs. Mama's housekeeper for 30 years had been a woman named Eunice Childs, gone now several years, and Toby was the grandson, a boy who used to rake the leaves on Grandview for pocket money and grew up tall and gone off to school somewhere. She called the number. Toby Childs was a sophomore at the university up in Iowa City, studying engineering, and when she told him who she was, there was a silence on the line and then a careful voice. "Miss Cordelia paid my tuition," he said. "All of it. Every semester, like clockwork. My grandmother cleaned that house her whole life, and Miss Cordelia, the young man stopped, gathered himself. She told me once it wasn't charity. She said my grandmother had given that family 30 good years, and the family had given precious little back, and she was going to fix one corner of that before she went. She made me promise I wouldn't tell the Vances. She said they wouldn't understand it. And she said something strange. She said if anybody ever tried to stop the payments after she was gone, I should trust the one who keeps the record. I figured that was just an old lady's way of talking." Tabitha closed her eyes in her dark kitchen. The one who keeps the record. 3 people now scattered across Dubuque, all of them carrying the same instruction like a password, all of them pointed at her without knowing her name. Mama had built something. Quietly, over her last year, while her family stayed away and counted rooms, the old woman had built a small architecture of mercy with Tabitha as the keystone, and she had told no one, because the one thing she knew for certain was that Lorraine Vance would set fire to any kindness that did not have a Vance name on it. That was the thing Tabitha understood now that she had not understood before. Mama had not simply loved her. Mama had trusted her with the truth, precisely because Tabitha was the one person in that family who had spent her whole life refusing to alter the record, no matter who it cost or who it served. Fidelity was not a soft virtue. It was the hardest thing Tabitha owned, and Mama had seen it, and Mama had built her whole last will on it, like a house on bedrock. She still had not opened the cedar chest. The brass key on its faded blue ribbon still hung at her throat, warm from her skin, the way Mama had asked. Keep it warm. She had assumed all this time that the little key went to the chest at the foot of Mama's bed, and she had let that mystery lie, because the chest was up on Grandview now, in a house full of people who would call her a thief for so much as touching the brass lock. But the chest, she would learn, was not locked at all, and the key at her throat was cut for something else entirely, something that was not in that house, something that had been carried downtown and set behind a different lock weeks before Mama died, waiting in the dark for the one woman who still wore the ribbon. She did not know that yet. She only knew the weight of it against her collarbone, and the way it had begun, lately, to feel less like a question and more like an answer she had not yet been allowed to read. The phone rang 2 evenings later, while the choir practice drifted faint through her kitchen window. It was a voice she did not know, a woman, low and precise, introducing herself as Marguerite Okafor, attorney, handling the estate of Cordelia Vance. "Mrs. Rhoades," the lawyer said. "Before the formal reading, I'm obliged to tell you something that does not concern the rest of the family. Mrs. Vance left 2 sealed packages in my care. The first will be opened at the reading with everyone present." A pause. The sound of a woman choosing her words the way Tabitha chose hers. "The second is not addressed to a name. It's addressed in her hand to, and I'm quoting her exactly, whoever still has my key. Tabitha's hand rose to her throat before she knew it was moving and closed around the small, warm brass of it through the cloth of her blouse. "Mrs. Rhoades," the lawyer said gently into the silence, "are you still there? Do you, by any chance, know what that means?" Tabitha looked out at the dark shape of the church 2 doors down, where 30 years of her own Sundays had taught her that some things are kept warm a long time before they are revealed. She did not answer right away. She was thinking about who else might know what she carried and what they would do to take it from her if they did. "Yes," she said finally, her voice low and even and certain as a line in the record. "I know exactly what it means." The cedar chest had been the one thing in Mama's room that no one in the family could open, and for that reason it had become, in the weeks since the funeral, a small object of obsession on Grandview Avenue. Lorraine had tried it herself, more than once, Tabitha would later learn, kneeling on the good rug in her funeral black with a butter knife, and then with a screwdriver, and finally with a locksmith. She called out from a shop on Central, a man who took one look at the old iron fittings and the seasoned wood, and told her that whatever was inside, Mrs. Vance had not wanted it opened in a hurry. He could force it, he said, but he would have to ruin the chest to do it. And even Lorraine, even with the clock running on the house out on Asbury Road, could not quite bring herself to take a crowbar to a dead woman's hope chest in front of the whole family, so it sat at the foot of the bed where it had always sat, 60 years of cedar and brass, and the Vances circled it and could not crack it, and it never once occurred to a single one of them that the chest had never been locked at all. It was the lawyer who told her. Marguerite Okafor called a second time, the morning after the first, and her precise low voice said a thing that rearranged everything Tabitha thought she had understood. "Mrs." Vance had left instructions, the lawyer said, that on the day before the reading, the family's chest, the cedar one, should be brought down to the parlor and simply opened, in front of witnesses, by anyone who cared to lift the lid. It was never locked, Mrs. Rhoades. The latch only looks like a lock. Cordelia counted on that. She counted on a certain kind of person never trying the simplest thing. Tabitha understood. She had watched it her whole life. The way the Vances assumed every door was barred to them only by their own importance. The way they pushed and threatened and called in locksmiths when all the world had ever asked of them was to lift gently and look. Mama had known her own family to the bone. She had hidden the most ordinary truth in plain sight, behind a latch that any tired cleaning woman would have simply tried with 2 fingers, and she had trusted that no proud hand would ever stoop to try it. The chest was opened the next afternoon in the parlor on Grandview, with the lawyer present and Tabitha standing back by the window where the light came up off the river, and Lorraine in the best chair, with her chin set and her hands folded like a woman expecting to be proved right. Garrett lifted the lid himself. It rose without a sound, the way a well-made thing does, and inside there was no jewelry, no deed of gold, no bonds. There were letters, bundles of them, tied with the same blue grosgrain ribbon that hung warm at Tabitha's throat, dozens of envelopes in Mama's slanting hand. There was a folded square of heavy paper that Tabitha would not see clearly until later, the deed to the house itself, set down at the bottom like a stone at the bottom of a well, and resting on top of the letters, in a flat round tin the size of a dinner plate, there was a reel of recording tape. The brown ribbon wound tight on its spool, and across the lid of the tin, in Mama's own unmistakable hand, 4 words written in black grease pencil. "Play this out loud." Lorraine laughed. It came out of her quick and sharp, the laugh of a woman who had been braced for a blow and gotten a feather instead. "Tapes," she said, "letters and an old tape." The woman spent her last good cents on a craft project. She stood smoothing her skirt, already turning toward the lawyer with the brisk air of someone ready to get down to the real business. "Marguerite, I think we can dispense with the theatrics. There's a proper will, a signed paper will, and I'd like us all to sit down tomorrow like adults and read it and be done." Whatever sentimental recordings my husband's grandmother made in her decline, they're not, I'm sure you'll agree, the sort of thing a court takes seriously. Marguerite Okafor did not agree and did not say so. She only set her hand flat on the tin, a gesture so exactly like Tabitha's own that Tabitha felt it in her chest. And she said in her even way, "The recording is part of the estate file, Mrs. Vance. It will be played at the reading." Mrs. Cordelia Vance was very specific about that, and her instructions were witnessed and notarized at the time she made them. I'm afraid I'm not free to set it aside. It was the word notarized that did it. Tabitha saw it land. She saw Lorraine's smile hold its shape, while something behind her eyes went very still, the look of a person doing sums in a hurry and not liking the total. Because a notarized instruction meant Mama had not made the recording in any decline at all. It meant she had gone downtown on her own legs or someone's arm to a lawyer's office and sat across a desk and put her wishes on the record with a witness watching and a seal pressed into the paper, the way you do a thing you mean to stand up in front of a judge. And Lorraine, who had spent her whole life sneering that Tabitha's work was glorified typing, that the record was just so much paper and ribbon, understood for the first time that the record was about to be used against her by the one Vance she had never thought to fear, a dead one. That was the afternoon the escalation began in earnest. Lorraine moved like a woman who could hear a clock. The reading had been set, by Mama's own instruction, for the coming Friday, and Lorraine spent the days between trying to move it up, to move it out of the lawyer's office and into the house, to have the paper will, the small plain one, read first and alone and treat it as final. She called Tabitha twice. The first time she was honey, all of it gone soft and sorrowful, telling Tabitha how hard this season had been on everyone, how Mama had loved her in her way, how it would be a mercy to the whole grieving family if they could just keep things simple and quiet and not go dragging a sick old woman's ramblings out in front of strangers. The second time, when honey did not work, she was iron. She reminded Tabitha what she was. She said the word again, the one from the dinner table, the one about the cleaning crew and the seat at the table, and she said it slower this time, so it would sit. She said that blood inherited, that it always had, that there were laws older than any tape, and that a woman who reached above her station for a house that was never meant for her tended to come away with nothing but the shame of having reached. She said Tabitha should think very hard about how she wanted to be remembered in this town. Tabitha laid both hands flat on her own kitchen table, off Romberg, 2 doors from the church, and she did not raise her voice. She'd spent 19 years not raising her voice while terrible things were said into the record in front of her, and she had learned that the calmest hand in the room is usually the one holding the truth. "Friday," she said, "at the lawyer's office, the same as Mama said it," and she hung up gently, the way you set down a thing you do not want to break, and she sat in the quiet and let her heart slow. What she did not know, what no one in that family knew yet, was that Lorraine's iron had a crack running straight through it. The house out on Asbury Road, the Vance house, the one Lorraine carried herself like a queen for owning, was not hers free and clear at all. She had borrowed against it quietly more than once, and then she had done a thing that careful people in that town did not do. She had borrowed against the Grandview house, too, the white Victorian up on the bluffs, the one she did not own, the one that was not hers and never had been. On the strength of an inheritance she had decided in her own mind was already settled. She'd put her name to papers promising a bank, a house that belonged to a dead woman's estate, betting everything she had and a good deal she did not, on the certainty that blood would carry the day and Mama's fortune would land in her lap before anyone counted too closely. It was the kind of arithmetic that only works if no one ever opens the books. And there was, downtown in a steel box at a lawyer's office, a woman's recorded voice and a folded deed about to open the books all the way. Garrett came to her on the Thursday night. He came alone, to the North End. to the clapboard house he had visited maybe 3 times in 11 years of marriage. And he stood on her porch with his collar open and his face gray, and he asked to come in like a man asking for a thing he knew he had no right to. Tabitha let him in. She made coffee because that was what her hands did when they did not know what else to do. And they sat at the kitchen table where she had read Mama's transcript and understood her life. And Garrett turned his cup around and could not look at her. "I have a check," he said finally. "It's a good number. More than fair. You take it and you don't come Friday and all of this just..." He made a small, helpless motion. With his hand goes quiet. Nobody has to be embarrassed. Nobody has to fight in front of a lawyer. You get money, real money, free and clear, and you get to walk away from this family that's only ever made you feel small. I'm offering you a door out, Tab. I'm trying to do you a kindness. She looked at the man she had married. She thought about the dinner on Grandview, the candlelight, the way the little leather book had come sliding out across the table into the light, her own handwriting, her own prayers, her own loneliness read aloud in his mother's voice for the family to laugh at. And she thought about his face that night. He had not looked away that night. That was the thing she had carried home and could not set down. He had slid the diary to his mother himself, his own hand, and then he had laughed along with the rest of them while the woman he was supposed to stand beside sat with her hands flat on the linen and said nothing. "You read my private pages to them," she said now, low and even. "You handed her the book, and tonight you sit at my table and call a check, a kindness. I'm trying to protect you," Garrett said, and she heard in it that he half believed it, that he had told himself this story until it was smooth. "No," Tabitha said, "you're trying to protect the number on that check, because if I come Friday, the books get opened, and you and your mother both know what's in them." She stood and carried the cups to the sink, her back to him, steady. "I'm not taking the check, Garrett. I'm going to be there Friday, and I'm going to do the one thing I have always done. I'm going to let the record speak." He left without another word. She heard his car go down Romberg into the dark, and she stood at her sink a long while, and across the 2 yards the church on Garfield had a single light burning in the choir room, somebody practicing late, the old hymn coming faint and patient through the glass. She did the last thing that Thursday night, the thing that turned the key in her own chest. She drove downtown to Marguerite Okafor's office in the limestone building on Main, and the lawyer met her after hours, and together they went into the back room where the estate files were kept. And there, on a steel shelf, was a steel box, gray and plain and heavier than it looked, logged in the ledger weeks before Mama died, signed in for safekeeping in Cordelia Vance's own careful signature. On its face was a small brass lock. Tabitha lifted the faded blue ribbon over her head, the ribbon that had hung warm at her throat for weeks, the little key Mama had pressed into her palm with 3 soft words, "Keep it warm." She fit the key to the lock. It slid home like it had been cut that morning and turned, and the lock gave with a small, clean sound that she felt go all the way down to the floor of her. She did not open the box that night. She locked it again and gave the key back to its ribbon and put the ribbon back around her neck where Mama wanted it. But now she knew. The chest on Grandview had never been the thing. The key had never been for the cedar and the brass at the foot of the bed. It had been for this, a gray steel box in a lawyer's back room, waiting in the dark for the one woman who still wore the ribbon, holding a dead woman's living voice wound tight on a spool and 4 words in grease pencil that answered, all by themselves, every word that had ever been read aloud to shame her. She drove home along the river with both hands steady on the wheel. The bluffs were clear and the water was running high, the way Mama always started, and Tabitha Rhoades went home to sleep one more night in her own small house off Romberg before she walked into that office on Friday and made the record true. Othell Briggs found her on the courthouse steps that Friday morning, the way he had found her on 100 ordinary mornings across 19 years. His old clerk's satchel under his arm and his organist's hands folded over it. He had taught her steno in a back room of this very building when she was a girl with a hotel cleaner's daughter's shoes. And he had never once in all those years let her believe the machine in her lap was a small thing. He looked at her now, at the blue ribbon at her throat, and the steno case she had brought out of habit and not need, and he did not ask her if she was ready. He only said the thing he had been saving. 20 years you've spent making the record true, he told her, and his voice came up out of him slow and sure as the low pedal note of the organ on Garfield. Go make this one true. Then he stepped back and let her go up the limestone steps alone, and she heard him behind her, under his breath, humming the old hymn, and it carried her all the way through the heavy doors. Marguerite Okafor's office took up the corner of the second floor. Tall windows on two sides, the Mississippi running broad and bright below the bluffs. The family was already seated when Tabitha came in. Lorraine Vance had taken the chair nearest the desk, in a suit the color of dove feathers, her hands folded just so, and around her the others had arranged themselves like a portrait of a family that knew its own worth. Garrett sat a little apart near the window, and he did not lift his eyes when his wife came in and took the last chair, the one set off by itself, the one she would have taken anyway. Tabitha set her case beside her foot and folded her hands in her lap, and was still. Marguerite Okafor closed the door, and the river light filled the room, and she began the way the law begins, with the small plain paper. It was a short will, that first one, signed and dated 3 years gone, the will Lorraine had been counting on. It left small sums, a clock to one grandchild, a set of dishes to another, $100 here and there, the kind of tidy bequests a careful old woman makes so that no one feels forgotten. To Lorraine, it left the contents of a particular drawer and a brooch. Tabitha watched her mother-in-law's face as the lawyer read, and she saw the smugness gather and settle, saw Lorraine's chin lift by degrees, because every line of that little paper was a line that did not give the Grandview house to anyone in particular, which meant, in Lorraine's arithmetic, that it fell to blood, that it fell to the eldest son's wife, that it fell to her. When Marguerite Okafor set the paper down, Lorraine was already half smiling, already smoothing her dove-gray skirt, a woman whose long bet had come in. Is that all of it? Lorraine asked, and the satisfaction in her voice was a thing you could have cut and served. Because I think we can be brief, Marguerite. The house simply passes the natural way. No, Mrs. Vance, the lawyer said. That is not all of it. She rose then and went to the cabinet behind her desk and brought back a gray steel box and set it on the wood between them all. It made a heavy, final sound against the desk, the sound of a thing that has been waiting. Tabitha knew that sound. She had heard it 3 nights before in a back room down the hall. On the face of the box was a small brass lock, and Marguerite Okafor laid her hand flat beside it, not on it, and looked around the room. Mrs. Cordelia Vance lodged this box with my office before she passed, she said. Sealed, witnessed, notarized. Her instruction was that it be opened here, today, in front of all of you, and that its contents be allowed to speak before any question of the estate is settled. There is one key. She gave it to the person she trusted to keep it. The lawyer's eyes went around the room, unhurried, and the silence that came down was a different silence than any that had come before it. A silence with weight in it, a silence in which Lorraine's smile began, very slowly, to lose its shape. The key, Marguerite Okafor said. Who has Mrs. Vance's key? No one moved. Garrett looked at his hands. A cousin coughed. And then Tabitha Rhoades reached up to her own throat and lifted the faded blue ribbon over her head, the ribbon that had hung warm against her skin since the day a dying woman pressed it into her palm with 3 soft words, and she leaned forward into the river light and laid the small brass key in the lawyer's open hand. The room made a sound. Not words, just a sound, the breath going out of 7 people at once. Lorraine came half out of her chair. That key could open anything, she said fast and high. That's nothing. That's a trinket. She gave the cleaning crew a trinket, Marguerite Okafor fit the key to the lock. It turned without a catch, clean and easy, the sound of a thing made to match a thing. The lid came up, and inside, nested in felt, was the flat round tin's twin, and within it the brown reel of recording tape wound tight on its spool, and the lawyer lifted it out and carried it to the machine on the side table. The old reel-to-reel that had been sitting there all along, threaded and waiting, that not one of them had thought to wonder about. She set the reel on its spindle. She drew the brown ribbon through the heads with 2 careful fingers, the way you handle the one copy of a thing that cannot be made again. She pressed the lever down. There was a breath of hiss, the sound of an empty room recorded long ago. And then Mama's voice came up out of the machine and filled the office. And it was not the voice of a woman in any decline, not weak, not wandering, but Cordelia Vance whole and dry and certain, the voice that had told Tabitha to keep the water high and the lamp low, the voice that had said, more than once, in that very bedroom, that the truth keeps better on tape than on paper. If you are hearing this, Mama said, then I am gone, and Marguerite has done as I asked, and the whole family is sitting in a row pretending to grieve me. Good. Sit still and listen, because I only mean to say it once. A pause. The small, wet sound of an old woman gathering her breath. I know what you all are. I have known it longer than any of you have been alive. I know which of you came up the hill to see me this last year, and which of you did not, and I know exactly who sat in my room in the dark and held the basin and read to me and asked nothing. So I will be plain, the way I never could be on paper, because paper burns, and I know whose hands would do the burning. Tabitha did not move. The light off the river lay across the desk and across the slow turning reel and across her own folded hands, and she kept very still, the way she had kept still her whole life while words came into rooms. The house on Grandview Avenue, Mama said, and everything in it and everything I have, I leave to my daughter. Not by blood, by every other way a person can be a daughter, which is the only way that ever counted for anything. I leave it to Tabitha Rhoades, who nursed me to the end while my own name stayed away, and who set down my wishes for me when I asked her to record me right, and never once asked what she was writing or what it was worth. She is my heir, the whole of it. I taped this because I knew Lorraine would put a match to any paper that did not have her name across the top, and I wanted my voice in the room when the truth came out, so that no one could say a tired old woman did not know her own mind. The reel turned. I knew my mind, Lorraine. I have always known it, and I knew yours. The voice on the tape was quiet a moment, and then it warmed, and it said one thing more, just for the one chair, set off by itself. Tabitha, they told you your whole life that every good room was a room you'd been let into. You were never let into mine. You were the only one I asked to come. Lorraine Vance was on her feet. Whatever she had meant to say came out of her in pieces, that the recording was a fraud, that a sick woman could be led to say anything, that she would have lawyers, that no court in Dubuque would hand a Vance house to her son's wife on the strength of an old reel of tape. But Marguerite Okafor only let the machine run to its hiss and then lifted the reel and set it gently in its tin. And when she spoke, her even voice cut clean under all of Lorraine's. It was witnessed and notarized the day it was made, Mrs. Vance. It is the lawful expression of Mrs. Cordelia Vance's wishes, and it will stand in probate. And since we are speaking of what a court will look at, she opened a second folder, the folded square of heavy paper from the cedar chest laid inside it. The deed, the estate, will, of course, be examining all encumbrances against the Grandview property, including the loan recently taken against it, by someone who did not own it. And that was the moment the iron cracked all the way through, in front of the whole family in the river light. Because Lorraine's secret came up out of the books the way a stone comes up out of a draining well, the second mortgage she had signed against a house that was never hers, on a fortune she had decided was already hers. And there was a word for putting your name to a bank's paper over property you do not own. And it was not a word the Vances liked said in a room. Lorraine sat down. She did not say anything else. The bet she had made with everything she had, and a good deal she did not. The bet that blood would carry the day before anyone counted too closely had been counted out loud in a dead woman's own voice. There were 2 more things in the folder, and Marguerite Okafor read them last because Mama had numbered them to come last. The ledger had carried a line that Tabitha had traced weeks before. DM, paid in full, summer, and here it was, made plain. Mama had quietly cleared the nursing school debt of Delam Raz, the aide who had gone unpaid and unthanked, and she had set down in her own hand that Tabitha will see it through. And there was a sum, modest and exact, lodged in trust for Toby Childs, grandson of the housekeeper who had kept Mama's floors for 40 years, his tuition paid forward, with the same instruction written beside his name as beside Della's, the instruction Mama had given each of them on a porch or at a back door in her last good year. Trust the one who keeps the record. Tabitha understood now why 2 near strangers had looked at her when she came asking, like they already knew her. They had been waiting for the one who wore the ribbon, the same as the box had been. She kept the house on Grandview, the tall white Victorian up on the bluffs over the Mississippi. But she did not keep it the way the Vances had kept it. By the next spring, there was a small brass plate beside the courthouse stenographer's room, the Cordelia Vance Scholarship, a year of steno tuition for a girl from the North End, or any place else they tell girls which rooms they have been let into. And the first one, to sit the machine under that plate, was a quiet 17-year-old whom Othel Briggs had found and sent up the hill, and Tabitha taught her the way she had been taught, slow and sure, and asked her nothing she did not offer. And upstairs in the house on Grandview, the room at the end of the hall, the one with the river in the window, she kept made up and ready, the lamp low and the water near, for the next girl the world told to stay near the door. She set one supper there at the end of that year. A small table, fewer chairs, the good candles lit, Othel Briggs at one elbow and Delam Raz at the other, and Toby Childs grinning across the linen, and no one in that room who had ever read a private page for a laugh. When the plates were cleared, Tabitha laid her own diary open in the center of the table, in the candlelight, her own handwriting face up where anyone could see, and she read one line of it aloud in her low and even voice to a smaller and a gentler table, and not one person laughed. She closed the book and laid her hand flat on its cover. The record stands now.